And we are back into some new territory for me, in the sense that I've taught Gideon several times, but have not taught through the book of Judges as an entire book before. And so now that we're past Gideon, we're onto some material that, I mean, I've read multiple times, but I don't know that I've ever preached on some of this stuff, which is why I'm having so much fun with you guys. This is really enjoying going through and figuring out what's happening and taking a better look at it than I would if I'm just reading for my own personal reading. You know, I get things out of it and I keep moving, and I'm really enjoying this. Let me ask you a question. Who is the richest king of Israel? Solomon. Man, boy, he did good. Who was the most victorious warrior king of Israel? David. Who was the first king of Israel? Gotcha. Everybody thinks Saul, the first king of Israel. Ask anybody who the first king of Israel is. Everybody will tell you Saul. Wrong. We're going to find out today who was the first king of Israel. Now, Saul was the first one with God's, we'll call it approval, even though he ended up messing up. But Israel calls the king back here in Judges chapter 8. So we'll take a look at that. You might remember we looked at the beginning of the chapter last week about the Ephraimites and their squabble with Gideon, and I'm not going to review a lot of that today. I want to look all the way down to the end of the battle, which is the middle of the chapter, starting around verse 18. He's got the last couple kings he's dealing with. It's Zebah and Zalmunna. And he's kind of holding them for their war crimes. And he says in verse 18, then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? He said, men like you, they answered, each one with the bearing of a prince. So evidently there was some nobility there, and the way they were dressed. Now, it's kind of interesting because how did they identify the people they were fighting? So they dressed like some kind of nobility rather than, well, they had shields and swords and, you know. I'm in Judges chapter 8. And I'm in verse 18. Judges 8:18. 19 now. Gideon replied, those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you. Turning to Jether, his oldest son. All right, now some of these names are going to be somewhat important, or at least to follow along. So far, this is the only named son we have of Gideon. We haven't heard much about his family up until this moment. And his family is important because of what we're about to read. Spoiler alert, they're going to ask Gideon to become king. Gideon is going to say, I will not be king, neither will my children or grandchildren be king. All right, so that's what he says. We're going to see why he says that right here. And he's got his oldest son. Turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, kill them. But Jether did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. When I first read that, and I don't know about you, I picture this like 10 or 11-year-old kid, swords as tall as he is, and daddy's saying, kill these kings because I'm going to teach you to be a man. And he's like, you can't do it, Daddy. You know, I mean, that's kind of the image I get. It's not kind of a sad thing, isn't it? But that's not what happened. Because in verse 22, It says, the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson. Which makes me think he was old enough to have a kid. Now, we talked briefly about this last week. There are some that think they're just speaking almost prophetically. Of course he's going to have grandsons. So you, your son, your grandson, your line, will pass it on. I tend to think that one existed. As a boy, I don't know if that's saying he could be as young as 20 years old, be considered a boy, not old enough to be in the army. It could be a couple different things. I'm not going to stake my claim on any of them because the Bible doesn't clarify. Other than this, the reason he did it was not simply his age. Why else did he do it?
He's scared.
Because he's scared. All right. And I think that's part of the reason Gideon said, after winning this battle, after putting his faith in the Lord and being told, go to battle with 300 bad news bearers of warrior, soldierhood, and now his son, who's seen all that, says, I'm afraid, I don't want to do it, I don't want to be part of this. And he's like, oh, that's it. I am not taking the throne because I don't want my kids to get it. I kind of think that's what's going on. Israelites said to Gideon, verse 23. No, let's back up. Verse 21. Zebah and Zilmunah said, come do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength. So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off their camels' necks. I think they would rather be killed by the commander than by a boy. You'll see through this, there's, in stories coming up in the book of Judges, there is a bit of pride about who kills you. We're going to see one here, Abimelech, in a little bit, or maybe next week, where he's going to say to his aide, kill me because I don't want the rock the woman threw at me to kill me. I don't want to die at a woman's hand. So there's some of that pride going on.
Who was that?
And we'll get there. I think it's Abimelech.
It's chapter.
Well, isn't it? Now, don't get me there right now. Hang on. We're on something else. We'll get there later, not today. Don't test me with names anyway.
Me either.
What's that?
Me
either.
It was Abimelech.
I was right. Mm-hmm. See, I knew it.
I was thinking of.
You thought I was wrong?
I was thinking of.
You know me better than anybody. I'm just kidding. All right. So I wrote down in my notes, just thinking through practical applications of this, some of the failure of Gideon as a parent, raising his son. The Bible does tell us that Gideon's son was, I think, old enough to have a son, and certainly could have had the faith, but he didn't. He was weak. And I think this is one of the reasons that Gideon did not want to become king in verse 22. Let's take a look at verses 22 and 23. The Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson. And it may be, if he's 20 years old, he could be considered a boy, not old enough to fight in battle, and have an infant that was there, saying, we see it. The line will continue.
He'd be most likely a soldier, though, because he was there in the battle, and he had a sword.
Yeah, so he could have been 20, 21, considered a boy just because he was young, or he acted like one. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that he was there, and he didn't do what his dad said because he was afraid, even in that situation, which is It's a shoo-in. You can't lose that battle. You're fighting a tied-up king, you know, and he didn't want to do it. And so verse 23, but Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, we'll be glad to give you them. So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels. That's about 43 pounds of gold. That's a little bit of money.
They had some bling, didn't they?
They did. Not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of the Midian or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. Watch this. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and his family. How is it a snare to the Israelites?
To worship it for giving the Midianites into their hands.
Sounds like another golden calf.
It's another golden calf. It's another thing to worship other than the one who really blessed them. It's in the broadest sense, the principle behind it is they worshipped something, they worshipped a gift from the Creator rather than the Creator. And I've seen people do that. God gives them something, and then that thing becomes more important to them than God, who gave it to them. Look, if God gives it to us, God can take it away. Doesn't mean He will. If God gives it to us and we show gratitude and appreciation and we use it as a story to tell others of God's goodness, there's a really good chance He lets us keep it and adds to that. That's typically how He works. But they took it and said, we don't need you anymore. We've got this ephod. So they worshipped it. They prostituted themselves to it instead of the Lord. Why use that word? What is going on?
Unfaithful to God, and somebody else took God's place in their hearts.
Yeah, when you displace God for anything, it's not just not loving God enough. It is adultery of the heart. It's prostitution in the eyes of God. Isn't that something?
Mm-hmm. Tom, was the ephod like the breastplate?
Mm-hmm. It is, and they were not supposed to make one. It was what the high priest wore. Only Aaron's family was supposed to make them and wear them. And they used it when they cast judgment and made rules, which is a really good point, because that's my next question. How did it become a snare to Gideon and his family? Think there's some pride that goes along with that thing?
It's like a big trophy.
Like a big trophy. Look what we did. What was the one thing God didn't want? That. For man to think they did it. It should be a look what God did for us. But instead, we need to be honored. And I think they used it for their honor and glory. And honestly, God let them get away with that throughout their lifetime.
It also became a snare to the people because they were following the wrong example.
Right.
So many times with the kings and the judges, if the king was righteous, then the people would follow the righteous king and do what was right.
Mm-hmm.
But when the king was ungodly and would worship Baals or other things, then the people would follow their example, and that king was held doubly accountable.
That's exactly right. And this is my point. Throughout the life of Gideon, because what we're going to read here is that up until Gideon's death, for 40 years, things went fine. Even though they had prostituted themselves to this ephod, and it was a snare to Gideon and his family, God let it ride. But it doesn't end there. Once Gideon is gone, look what it does to his family. And that's what we're going to see. And so what I want to tell you is when it looks like you're getting away with, for the lack of a better term, let's call it non-dedicated living. When you're riding the fence, when you're walking in sin, but it doesn't seem that bad to you, and God doesn't seem to be dealing with you, and it doesn't seem that big of a deal. If God really wanted me to change it, I would. Don't just look past what's happening to you. Look what's going to happen to your family. And that's what didn't happen for a few generations ago, and we're seeing the results of it around us. Okay? People that walked in sin, and God said, I'm being patient. And we're going to see what happens to Gideon's family.
Tom, when they made idols, they weren't like worshiping, I mean, as far as they were concerned, they weren't worshiping like Baal or Asherah or something, like the golden calf. They said, this is the God that delivered you.
Well, they did that with the golden calf. They took the golden calf and said, this is the God that brought you up out of Egypt. And so it's true that happens sometimes, but I don't think that's the case here. I don't think that they're looking at the ephod as a different God, as a different entity. I think they're looking at it as a reminder of the victory that God gave, but they're focused more on the victory they got rather than the fact that God gave it. And here's why we'll see in a moment that part of the problem is the Baals and Asherah still. Now, just to answer the question, fast forward a little bit here. We're going to get down in chapter 9 where Abimelech, a son of Gideon, hires some people to take out the rest of Gideon's sons. We're going to see that in a minute. But look down at chapter 9, verse 3. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he's related to us. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. So they're going to get money from the temple of Baal-berith in Israel to set up Abimelech as king. So are the Baals and Asherah still a problem in Israel? In fact, I'm getting ahead of my lesson. There's some good stuff I'm wanting to get to. But this is, again, pitting Baal against God. Because it is Baal-berith's temple versus Jerub-baal. Let Baal contend with Jerub.
Let Baal contend
with Gideon. So you got me ahead of my stuff. Because there's some good stuff in here. So let's... Jerub-baal, I know that was bad, wasn't it?
Let Baal contend with Jerub.
Yeah, let Baal contend with contend. What a contentious way to... All right, where do I want to get back to? All right, let's look at, we got to finish this chapter, 28 to 35. Let me finish this and we'll get into chapter 9, some of this good stuff. And so 8:28. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went back home to live. Now, listen carefully. He had 70 sons of his own.
That's a lot of kids.
How could she do that? Well, she didn't. They did. For he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. All right. Next name of a son of Gideon. The second one we get is Abimelech. He's the half-brother of 70 brothers.
And he means my father is king.
Yeah, and the name Abimelech means my father is king. So Gideon, by the way, you know what a concubine is?
Yeah.
What is a concubine?
Mistress.
That's all it is.
What is it?
A mistress. It is not a legal term. You know, I think I grew up probably because I heard that term when I was too naive to believe that people that were in the Bible just slept around. And I thought it was like just like there's engagement and then there's marriage, that the engagement isn't fully married, but it's more than nothing. I always felt like a concubine is like not a full wife with all the inheritance privileges, but a responsibility there. You take them on as a concubine. In fact, you look up the definition and it can simply mean a sex slave. Somebody I go have that with, and that's it. It's all it's. And
So common. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, was it okay back then, you know? Because it was everywhere.
because it was everywhere.
We had thousands.
And it was, but every time there was, you see the problems from it. Just like in this case. And in fact, because she will be referred to as, Abimelech will be the son of his slave who lived in Shechem. You know, when he went to Shechem, he had somebody to shack up with. I mean, that was basically it.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's about as bad as you would think it should be. This is what's going on, and everybody knew. And so Abimelech is the only son we know of that is not from an official wife. And he's got several of those. So he's got 70 kids.
Concubine, it's exactly what you said, but it says she's below the, all right. It says a woman with whom a man cohabits without being married, such as one having a recognized social status in a household below that of a wife.
Yeah.
No.
So that's Abimelech, all right? Where did I leave off reading?
32.
32, Gideon's son. All right. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. No sooner had Gideon died, and that seems to be a theme throughout the scriptures, doesn't it? I think God withholds things, his wrath and his judgment, until righteous or semi-righteous. Righteous compared to everybody else around. Those people that at some point in their life had a step of faith and God used them. He seems to show a respect for that. But when they're gone, no sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal Berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. Why did they use Jerubbaal here instead of just Gideon?
Because now the Israelites are worshiping Baals and has Baal Bereth as their god.
Yep.
Why would they respect Jerubbaal?
Right. In fact, by calling him Jerubbaal, now that they are worshiping Baal again, they're really saying,
Baal got him.
yeah, he's finally dead. Gideon is our enemy, the enemy of our God. So you can see if Gideon's family is considered the offspring of the enemy of their God, what respect would they have? Now we're talking about Israel. We're not talking about the Canaanites. You know what I'm saying? This is Israel.
Earlier when you were talking about the first king of Israel, were you talking about Abimelech or Gideon?
When the what?
When you were asking about who's the first king of Israel?
Abimelech.
Abimelech, okay. So I was wondering, because you said Abimelech means my father is king. And
Right.
Gideon must have named him that.
Yeah, but I think that's where it became a snare. He said he would not become king, neither would his son, and they hadn't. But yet, he felt like the king. I think the pride was there. And there's some really interesting stuff coming up. I'm seeing more and more how this sets up for 1st and 2nd Samuel and the calling of a king through what God does. It's all setting up right here. Even, I think it's the whole thing is from Judges through 1st and 2nd Samuel and through the Kings, God intended for the nation to be a theocracy. You know what a theocracy is? What is a theocracy?
Governed by God.
Yeah, governed by God. God is the king, and he passes his judgment down through priests, and you do what he says. You do what this says. And when part of the frustration is when Israel demands a king, and we talk about that, usually start the story in 1 Samuel, and that's why we think Saul is the first king. But it goes back to here, and it even starts with Gideon saying, hey, my son is the son of the king. I'm not really your king, but he's the son of the king, you know. And it kind of puts that thought. All right. This is about to get good. All right, are we in chapter 9 now?
I think so. Yes.
Yes. All right, here we go.
Couldn't wait.
Abimelech's son, Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem. All right, so Daddy Gideon died. He lives in Shechem. All his brothers and the whole real family live somewhere else. He feels ostracized. He sees his opportunity to be important. I'm the son of the king, you know. And I think it was an issue of pride. His mom was not high in society, but he was known because his dad was Gideon. And it came with benefits. I think they nicknamed him Hunter. Oh, no. Never mind. That's a joke. Hunter Biden. Sorry about that. But he took advantage of his dad and who his dad was, and so he goes to his uncles. Do you like that one? He's back to his, breathe, no AFib, okay? He goes to his uncles, and in verse 2, he ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you. Now remember, he is saying, using Jerubbaal on purpose.
He's siding with
the Baals. Saying, are you going to let 70 people who are from contend with Baal? Let Baal contend with him, be your leaders? And I think there was in a sense, Gideon never accepted the kingship, but he had some leadership. And I think the people kind of thought, when he's gone, who's going to do that? Well, he's got 70 sons. And so Abimelech goes to Shechem and says, hey, if we don't do something, they are going to step up into leadership. And we can't have that. And I really thought about this. I really don't want to be political, but if you use discernment to see the tricks that the devil uses, it's consistent. Okay? So, what you got to do is, without stating any facts, just say, we're going to be in trouble if they lead. And so why pick Abimelech? Abimelech does not say, because if you pick me, this is what I'll do for you. Here's what he says. Which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I'm your flesh and blood. Vote for me because I'm the right skin color. Vote for me because don't you want a black woman as your first president? Hey, I don't care if it's a black woman, white male. Tell me if they can lead and how they'll lead. But here it's simply, I'm your flesh and blood. Pick me. Now we're going to see it gets worse than that. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Verse 3. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, well, he is related to us. It tells me they're non-thinking, follow the crowd people. And you know why they are? Give me some other reasons that we can think that they would be like that. From the text.
Did he chastise the people of Shechem?
Not yet. Oh wait, was that?
Okay, hold up.
Yes. How is it that we can see that these people of Shechem are just follow the crowd people? Well, let me just give it to you. They watched God do miraculous things, and as soon as some people stepped up and said, but let's just worship Baal, they all built a new altar. Y'all see a problem with that? And the minute you quit having convictions to worship God and you follow the Baals, you are going to be deceived and misled, and who knows where it's going to take you. And that's the condition of these people.
Follow the shiny things.
The what?
Follow the shiny things.
Yeah. Follow the shiny thing. There's, you know. And they go and never stop to think. Verse 4. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels. Does that not sound like... It's like I watched that over the last few years. Hired people to go out and destroy stores and riot in the streets. Nothing's new under the sun. And again, I'm not saying this to be political. I'm just telling you this. What I see here, it's the same kind of stuff. Hire somebody to go. You do your dirty work. And get this, 70 shekels of silver. That's very different than 43 pounds of gold that Gideon got. This comes out to about 1 3/4 pounds, or about 800 grams of silver. All right, 800 grams of silver in today's prices. I looked it up today on the web. It's $1 a gram. So for $800, they hired scoundrels to go and kill all 70 sons of Gideon except one for $700, $800. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So what do they do? Verse 5. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. Ha! Let Baal contend with them? We have. They are doing it in the name of Baal from Baal Berith. By the way, Baal Berith means the Baal of judgment, like
Mine says the Lord of the Covenant.
Lord of the covenant, the promise, the commitment. And here they are, wiping them out.
See, when I first read this, I just underlined, I got ahead, I know. And
How dare you?
I know. And it says one stone murdered him. You know, I was thinking he threw it and killed some.
No. It's like a big stone that they brought them up one at a time and
They're
whack.
all in the same place.
Just killed them all at the same spot. Yeah, and did it, I probably lined them up.
Wow.
And one at a time, they watched each other die. And, you know, the first one didn't have to watch anybody else die, but he died the fastest. The last one lived the longest, but watched everybody die. It's a lose-lose situation. But one escapes.
Jotham?
It says, but Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal,
Third son we know about.
that's the third name we know about out of 70, depending on how you think, because all 70, but then 2 got Abimelech and Jotham.
Is one of the 70 though.
Yeah, probably. Unless there were 71, because it killed all 70 except one. Like, there's debate on that, and I don't really care. We don't have the other 69 or 70 listed.
Was they all males then?
The sons would have been. Well, he would have had daughters too, but they're not a threat to overtake
So it's 70
men. Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah, who knows how many kids he had altogether. They didn't list it because, I hate to say it, it didn't matter to them. They didn't have the respect that we do. All right, so 70 sons died at the stone. Jotham escapes. He's the youngest son of Gideon, and he escaped by hiding. Verse 6, then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar of Shechem to crown Abimelech king. Now, it didn't happen overnight. I don't know how much time transpired from the time that he killed them all till the time they organized this coronation of Abimelech, but they all came together to crown Abimelech. What?
So you don't think they were all murdered in one day?
Yes,
They were.
I do think they were murdered in one day.
But all of the rest of
Verse
this
6.
But between verse 5 and verse 6, where they killed all the brothers, and then all of a sudden they're all gathered together coronating him as king, I think that took a little bit of time. And the reason is because Jotham ran into hiding. Look at verse 7. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them. Well, told about what? He wasn't told about the killing of his brothers. He knew that and escaped by hiding. So that's not what it's talking about. So verse 7 is talking about verse 6. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, so he finds out they're coronating the murderer of all 70 of my brothers. They're going to set him up as king when that was our family's thing. We never really took the position, but the honor was ours. It had become a snare to Gideon and
And his sons.
his family. So it's something that they held dear. So now he sees the murderer, half-brother, son of a sex slave, is going to be king. And the devil's laughing. Because he's going to be king over God's people. Worshiping the Baals. You see how it's a spiritual battle as well as physical on the earth? All right, so verse 7, when Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them. So I wish I had a picture of it. There's 2 mountains there at Shechem, and they're kind of on one side, the same place that Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That spot. And that's why the devil picked that spot, by the way, because he wants to try to overthrow and overturn what God does. So he gets there, but on the other mountain, and you can hear down in the valley from the mountaintop, he goes up there where he's at enough of a distance he can be heard,
For as long as he needs to say this.
but he can still be safe. And he says, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. Now look, Gideon's family had its problems, but at least he still is putting God at the center of it and not Baal at the center of it. Man, I'll tell you what, verses 7 and 8 took courage.
Oh, goodness.
For him to stand up in front of the people that killed his 70 brothers and say, stop and think about what you're doing. And he doesn't just do it for his defense. He's not doing it to protect himself. He's doing it so that God would listen to them.
He's thinking of them.
He is. I think there's an element of that there. Verse 8, one day, oh, this is interesting. We're going
I gotta stop reading ahead, because
to quit reading ahead, Lisa. Here, I tell you what, change seats. You can go ahead. I want to hear you explain this parable.
go ahead.
Because this is, see, I'm just kidding with you, Lisa. I wouldn't tease you if I didn't love you.
I know that.
All right. Now, here we go.
I'm dying to have to all three.
Well, you know what? Maybe we should pick this up next week.
No.
All right. This is actually, I believe, the first parable in the Bible, which is kind of interesting. So he stands up and he gives this illustration. He says, one day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. All right, so and this is why I think this is a more important chapter than we give it credit normally, because a lot of the theme from this point on and through 1 and 2 Samuel is that they are demanding a king, and God wanted to be the king, and it's this struggle between them, and who's behind it? Baal. It seems logical that we should have a king. And God is trying to say, but as soon as you do, they're going to put pressure on you to do things that I don't want you to do, or not to do things I would want you to do. And that's part of the struggle with the Israelites. He wanted to be their king. And from this point on, it starts with this topic of who's going to be their king. And so this bigger, you'll see over time. But just from stuff I've studied before, this is a more important beginning than I had realized before. So verse 8, one day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree answered, should I give up my oil by which both gods and humans are honored to hold sway over the trees? Wow, isn't that poetic?
It's very poetic.
All right, so who would like to explain that verse to me?
Yes, somebody please.
I would love to, but I just don't understand.
Well, I was hoping to have some collective intelligence here today.
Well, so far, is the olive tree probably Abimelech? Because,
No.
okay,
Olive tree would be Gideon.
Olive tree would be Gideon. Mm-hmm. Because they asked him to be king, and he said no. So I don't want to do that. Why didn't he want to do that?
His family was weak.
Because what?
His family was weak.
Because his family was weak. We saw that earlier. I think that's part of it. Why else? Look at the parable. Look at the verse we just read. That's where you're going to start to see some hints.
should I give up my oil?
Is there a cost? Is there a cost to leadership? Yeah, it's like all of a sudden you can't just worry about filling your own jars of oil. You got to be worried about everybody else's jars of oil. People think that the higher you go on the ladder, the more honor there is. I totally disagree with that. And this principle that we're going to see from this parable is spot on, where the most honorable thing you can do is what God calls you to do. It's not about how high you can climb on the ladder. I think one of the biggest problems I've seen in organizations, even missions organizations that I was a part of, is when people unqualified pursue too high of a position for where they're most effective. And you can see that in any business. People just need to be satisfied with where God puts them. Always trying to improve, get better. We're not talking about mediocrity. but we're saying don't just pursue something because it's a position. Pursue it if God wants you there. And Gideon was like, I think a lot of it was fear, but a part of it was, I've got stuff to do here, and why would I give up the benefit I already am? And it says to gods and man. We'll get to that in a minute. Why would I give that up to sway over the other trees? Somebody else can sway over them. Make sense?
You did pretty good, 4 years.
Yeah, for 40 years he had peace and had 70 sons and who knows how many daughters, and man was busy.
That's a lot of time.
And it spent a lot of time. I'm going to keep reading through the parable. Then we'll come up and get some basic observations out of the way, and then we'll get in deeper and deeper in whatever time we have, which isn't a lot. We will have to finish the parable next week. We won't get all the way through everything today. We'll get through enough to give you a little handle on it, at least so you can sleep for the next 7 days, not lay awake at night wondering what's going to happen.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just read through this. Verse 10, next the tree said to the fig tree, come and be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?
He really wants him to be the king, doesn't he? Oh, sorry.
Well, no, that's okay. But I don't think that's Gideon. I think that's
The fig tree.
the fig tree is somebody other than Gideon.
Oh, the fig tree, but the olive tree, we said.
The olive tree was probably Gideon. Verse 13, but the vine, verse 12.
12, yeah.
Then the tree said to the vine, come be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come be our king. The thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. Now, the trees, we're about to find out, are likened to the cedars of Lebanon. Those are tall, beautiful, strong trees. How do they take shade under a thorn bush?
Well, the thorn bush overtakes
What happens to things that grow up under a thorn bush?
choked out.
So, but here's what the thorn bush says. If you want to take refuge in my shade, but if not what?
If you don't want to take refuge.
If you don't want to take refuge under my shade, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Who says this? I mean, in the parable, who's talking?
Abimelech.
The farm bush.
The thorn bush, which we believe is Abimelech. Okay? So there's a warning coming from the thorn bush, follow me or else. And listen, anytime somebody says, follow me or else, look what's going to happen to you. Bad news. Bad news. Now, let's get some, because I've got 2 minutes left, that's why we're not going to finish. Let me get some obvious observations out of the way. There are 3 beneficial trees. We got the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine.
And the what?
The vine.
Okay.
Those are the 3 beneficial trees or vines.
Grapevine.
Yeah, the grapevines.
In decline, in value.
They do decline in value. That's a good point. And then the 4th one is non-beneficial, and it's the thorn bush. It's dangerous. Okay? The word gods there is plural Elohim. So how are those things beneficial to gods and humans? Talk about olive oil and fruit of the vine, the wine. Boy, it got quiet. both oil is not only used, I mean, how many people that cook use olive oil? Beneficial, isn't it? All right, so we know how it's beneficial to humans, but to gods, you know, oil is also used in a lot of ceremonies and things like that. So are the wine. It's used in a lot of ceremonies. So it is of benefit to both gods and people in their worship. Both worships of Jehovah God and in the worship of the Baals. And I'm satisfied with that interpretation of that phrase in there, although I believe there's even more to it than that. I'm trying to figure some of that stuff out. I think there's a lot more about Elohim in the Bible than what we have been taught in the past. It's something to think about.
Find out, you let us know.
Yeah, I will. Of course I will. So if the olive tree is Gideon and Abimelech is the thorn bush, there are two other in between. And there's a lot of debate about who those are, because the Bible doesn't make it real clear. Could it be the son and grandson that was mentioned earlier? Possibly. I've even had some of the commentaries that are read on it, because those aren't as easily identifiable, even claim that none of them refer to people, not Abimelech or Gideon. I disagree with that. But sometimes when you come across things that you don't know, that doesn't mean the answer isn't there. It's just sometimes harder to find. But settle on what you do know, what you can see, and what is clear. What is clear? They kept multiple attempts, and in the parable, 4 attempts to try to find somebody to be king. They're actively pursuing getting somebody as king. We all agree that that's in the parable?
Yes.
We also agree that 3 of the 4 said, it's better not to do it if I'm already being successful in other ways. I don't need it. And 1 doesn't care about success, but sees the pride in it. That is in the parable. Would we all agree to that? And that they would have been better off not to pursue the thorn bush. They'd have been better off without a king than to accept one that is as dangerous as Abimelech. We agree with that. All right. It is now 8:02. What comes next is look at... I asked you who was speaking in verse 15. The thorn bush said to the trees. So that thorn bush it's the thorn bush in the parable. Who is it being referred to? Abimelech. So Abimelech is being spoken about in this verse, in the parable. He's speaking. If you really want to anoint me as king, come on in, I got you. If not, look out.
I'll burn you.
I'll burn you. All right? That's what he says. Now, verse 16, who's speaking there?
Jotham.
Yep, back to Jotham. And Jotham gives us a little bit of the interpretation of the parable and a new prophecy. We're going to cover that next week. That's where we're going to start. Okay?
Very good.
So let me ask you a question. Who was the first king of Israel? Abimelech. Didn't know that, did you? All right. Any other comments, questions, observations?
Looks like a proud daddy.
I think the question of the trees before would be probably Gideon, and then his first son,
Jether.
or the 70 that would have replaced him, and because it's listed there as a possible threat, 70 leaders, you know.
Right.
And then coming down to,
Could be him.
yeah, because those 70 are killed off, it's coming down
To the youngest. Yeah, to Jotham. It could be. The only reason, because I read a bunch of stuff, and they said, but nobody ever asked him to be king, and he didn't refuse it, that we know of. Now, it's possible that there were some people that did. What I'm saying is there is missing history for us in the parable. I believe it happened because it's in the parable. If it were important to understand it, if it were important to know who each tree represented, if it was important for that, in order to understand the whole thing, it would have been told to us in Scripture. Okay? And so that's why I'm comfortable with saying, I'll take the obvious, and the others, I'm happy to say there's some missing data. But the point of it, the principle in it, what we interpret from it, clear as day. And I'm okay with that. I believe that God tells us not only as much as we need to know, but everything we need to know. And so I have a lot of questions. He'll tell me when it's time.
I think that one of the, even though we're not sure who the other trees are, it can also be said that it's just, I don't think it is totally just poetic license, but he's using the parable to say we had like olive tree, then fig tree, then vine. It gets less and less useful.
Right.
Olive trees like.
And I think that is clearly the point. That
option. And the next bed.
they're settling. They're settling.
Worse, and then he says, and then the thorn bush, you idiot.
Yeah, exactly. If that's really what you want, But that is what people do. That is what they do. And so I do think that if you just threw one in as poetic license to show you're getting worse and worse and worse and worse,
Sounds like a president.
So I think that's why I think the point is less about what each person gave up or kept in order to not become king. I don't think that's the issue as much as it is the fact that they are yearning for one and they're willing to scrape the bottom of the barrel just to have one so it's not God. And I think that's going to be the issue. I think anything else, though we would like to know it, could have distracted us from that. Okay, anything else? Good stuff. You guys are fun.
What stood out to me is king is not capitalized, and is it only if there actually is a king, like King Herod, and it's capitalized? I don't know.
I don't know.
Does that mean there isn't a king?
It's capital king if you're talking about a person, the king.
That is the king.
But if it's just a position
That they don't have yet.
but nobody's in that position, I don't think it has to be capitalized.
I don't know.
Yeah, the position would not be capitalized.
Right, just only if it is position.
Like if you say right to the pastor of the church, that P in pastor would not be capitalized. But if you said, I spoke to pastor and he said, that would be capitalized because you're referring to the person. Same, it's just grammar. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and I thank you for what we're learning from your Scripture. I pray that we would go away from this, if nothing else, realizing how important it is to keep you first. And help us to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Very good. Thank you.